You. Stop. Imagine a world where the fastest way to communicate required code, and your own voice couldn't travel farther than a shout. That was 1875. Then came Alexander Graham Bell. But forget the friendly textbook myth. The invention of the telephone was an accidental revolution. It was a brutal, desperate race to the patent office that climaxed on Valentine's Day, 1876. Was it a flash of genius, or was the idea actually stolen? We'll show you the shadowy corporate titan, Western Union, who tried to crush Bell, and the forgotten Italian immigrant who lost the credit for a $1 trillion idea because he couldn't afford a $10 fee. This is the untold story of how the human voice was made electric, how one man built the most powerful monopoly in world history, Ma Bell, and how a simple, accidental discovery defined the entire digital age we live in today. Get ready for the accidental revolution. Alexander Graham Bell, the patent wars, and the empire of the human voice. The accidental revolution. Alexander Graham Bell, the patent wars, and the empire of the human voice. Prologue. The whisper of the age of wire. In the year 1876, when Alexander Graham Bell successfully transmitted the first intelligible words over a wire, the world was already in the throes of a communications revolution. Yet, this revolution was limited by a crucial constraint: code. By the 1870s, the speed of information transfer had already shrunk the globe. The telegraph, utilizing Samuel Morse's dots and dashes, allowed messages to flash across continents in minutes, a stunning leap from the weeks or months previously required. This new ability for instantaneous long-distance communication fundamentally reshaped business, finance, and geopolitics. The industry was dominated by corporate giants, chief among them Western Union. Formed by consolidation in 1856, Western Union completed the first transcontinental line in 1861. By the mid-1860s, the company boasted approximately 100,000 miles of wire and was valued in excess of $40 million, establishing itself as the undisputed financial and technological titan of the Gilded Age. Despite this dominance, the telegraph suffered from a profound bottleneck: the sheer inefficiency of its network. Only one message could be transmitted over a single wire at any given time. The prevailing commercial demand of the era was not to invent a new form of communication, but to optimize the existing one. Electrical engineers were locked in a frantic race to develop the multiple telegraph, often called the harmonic telegraph. The goal was to transmit several messages simultaneously by utilizing different musical tones or frequencies over the same wire. Innovators like Elisha Gray focused intensely on this problem, inventing acoustic telegraphy in 1875. This context is vital. Bell's invention was not a targeted solution to an obvious communication gap. Instead, it was an accidental, disruptive byproduct of research rooted in an entirely different field. His lack of traditional focus on optimizing telegraphic code allowed him to pursue a path that electrical orthodoxy deemed impractical. Had he been purely focused on electrical engineering like his rivals, he would likely have continued optimizing code transmission, potentially missing the radical leap necessary to transmit the human voice. 2. The Professor and the Undulatory Current. Bell's acoustic obsession. The unique intellectual trajectory that led to the telephone began not in an electrical workshop, but in the realm of human physiology and acoustics. Alexander Graham Bell's primary passion, long before he became an electrical pioneer, was the science of speech and the education of the deaf. Bell inherited this focus from a family lineage steeped in elocution. He was the son and grandson of speech researchers. His father, Melville Bell, developed a system known as visible speech, which used symbols to help deaf people learn to speak by visualizing and forming the correct mouth shapes. This upbringing immersed Alexander in the precise physics of vibration, resonance, and sound waves. This unique background enabled Bell's critical conceptual leap. While engineers like Gray focused on transmitting discrete pulses, the intermittent current of the telegraph, Bell envisioned a system that could carry the continuous, complex waveform of the human voice. He theorized that if a diaphragm could vibrate in perfect response to speech, that mechanical motion could be used to create an electrical current that exactly mirrored the sound wave, just as the human eardrum transmits vibrations to the inner ear. Bell articulated this critical technical breakthrough as the need for an undulatory or oscillatory current of electricity. This undulatory current varies continuously in intensity, carrying the complex, rich data of speech waveforms, fundamentally differentiating it from the sharp binary on/off pulses of the telegraph. He publicly detailed this theoretical foundation in his paper, Researches in Telephony, presented in May 1876. Bell, the theoretician of sound, needed a pragmatic, hands-on partner to turn concept into copper. Enter Thomas Watson. Hired in 1875 from an electrical instrument shop, Watson provided the essential technical expertise to build and rigorously test Bell's highly theoretical concepts. Watson was far more than an assistant. He was an inventor in his own right, later contributing over 35 patents, including critical innovations like the ringer, to signal an incoming call, and the switch that hung up the receiver, which were vital in making the telephone commercially viable. Their partnership exemplifies how truly disruptive innovation often requires the fusion of abstract theoretical genius and practical engineering mastery. Third, the cruelest race, the patent office, and the battle for priority. The invention of the telephone is often characterized less by a singular moment of creation and more by a breathtaking, cruel race to the patent office. The established narrative often glosses over the simultaneous efforts of others, particularly Elisha Gray, whose work ran parallel to Bell's, culminating in a dramatic confrontation on Valentine's Day. On February 14, 1876, both Alexander Graham Bell and Elisha Gray filed critical documents regarding the electric transmission of speech. Bell filed his full patent application, number 174,465, which was recorded as the fifth document received by the office that Monday. Gray, an electrical engineer and co-founder of Western Electric, filed a caveat, a notice of impending patent, detailing a speaking telegraph design, recorded as the 39th. Though the timing remains controversial, the established legal precedents favored Bell due to his filing of a full application over Gray's mere caveat. The most intense point of contention centered on the concept of the liquid transmitter. This design, where a vibrating wire barely touches a cup of conductive liquid, Bell used a water-acid solution. Modern models use vinegar, allowed the variable resistance necessary to capture the vocal waveform. Gray's caveat provided a clear description of a liquid transmitter. Critics throughout history have alleged that Bell illicitly viewed Gray's caveat and incorporated the idea just prior to his successful transmission in March 1876. However, historical records provide a robust defense for Bell. His extensive experimental notebooks, predating the 1876 filings by years, show a consistent and logical progression toward devices using liquid transmitters, including drawings remarkably similar to the design he eventually used. Furthermore, Bell had already filed a patent for a primitive fax machine containing drawings of multiple liquid transmitters in April 1875, 10 months before Gray filed his telephone caveat. This evidence suggests Bell was independently developing the technology, even if the final implementation was catalyzed by the urgency of the patent race. Gray's critical error was not technical, but strategic and legal. Bell's application was initially suspended for 3 months to allow Gray to file a full patent application. However, Gray's sponsor and lawyer advised him to abandon the caveat, seemingly under the mistaken belief that Bell's priority could not be challenged. By failing to contest Bell's priority, Gray paved the way for Bell to be granted U.S. Patent 174,465 uncontested on March 7, 1876. Gray's decision, likely influenced by his greater confidence in the immediate commercial potential of his multiple harmonic telegraph, represents a defining moment in industrial history. A moment where legal strategy, rather than purely technical merit, secured the ownership of a trillion-dollar industry. 4. The Forgotten Pioneers, Meucci's Teletrafono and the Price of Poverty. To fully appreciate the narrative of the telephone's invention requires acknowledgement of the tragedy that befell Antonio Meucci, the Italian immigrant whose work substantially predated Bell's and whose lack of funding secured Bell's place in history. Meucci, working in Havana and later in Staten Island, New York, developed the basic concept of the telegrafo parlante, or teletrofono, as early as 1849. He even set up a rudimentary communications link in his home, connecting his basement laboratory to his wife's second-floor bedroom after she became afflicted with crippling arthritis. He demonstrated his working invention publicly in 1860, with a description published in a New York Italian-language newspaper. Meucci's failure was driven entirely by poverty and circumstance. He exhausted his life savings pursuing the work. Crucially, he was unable to raise the funds necessary for a full patent application, forcing him to settle for a temporary, one-year renewable caveat, starting in December 1871. Compounding the tragedy, Meucci struggled to learn English well enough to navigate the complex American business community. The fatal lapse occurred after 1874, when Meucci, by then living on public assistance, was unable to afford the $10 fee required to renew his caveat. If he had managed to secure that small sum, historical consensus suggests that no patent could have been issued to Bell. Adding to the unfortunate circumstances, Meucci later learned that his working models, stored at a Western Union affiliate laboratory, were reportedly lost, a laboratory complex where Alexander Graham Bell later conducted experiments. This systemic failure to protect Meucci's rights haunted Bell's legacy for decades. In 1887, the U.S. government moved to annul Bell's patent on the grounds of fraud and misrepresentation, a serious case that the Supreme Court found viable and remanded for trial. Meucci died in 1889. When the Bell patent expired in 1893, the case was discontinued as moot, leaving the matter of the true inventor legally unresolved. It was not until 2002 that the U.S. House of Representatives formally acknowledged Meucci's life and achievements, recognizing his foundational work in the invention of the telephone. Meucci's story demonstrates that in the technologically charged Gilded Age, superior financial backing and legal access were often the true gatekeepers of ownership. V. Breakthrough and validation. The voice made electric. Technical success and commercial validation are distinct milestones. Bell achieved the former on March 10, 1876, just 3 days after his patent was granted, proving his theory of the undulatory current. Working with Thomas Watson, Bell set up the rudimentary circuit using the controversial liquid transmitter, a practical device where a membrane vibrates a wire in a vinegar/acid solution, modulating the circuit's resistance. Bell, positioned in one room, spoke the first intelligible words ever transmitted electrically. "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." Watson, in the adjoining room, immediately recognized Bell's voice and understood the command, validating the experiment and confirming the principle of continuous waveform transmission. This was the technical birth of the telephone. However, the world remained largely skeptical of this talking toy. The invention required a massive public relations push and crucial financial affirmation to secure the capital needed for infrastructure deployment. That validation came unexpectedly at the U.S. Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876. Amidst displays of grand industrial engineering, such as the magnificent Corliss steam engine, Bell unveiled his humble device. Crucially, his exhibit was visited by two highly influential figures whose reactions transformed the device from a curiosity into a sensation. The first was Dom Pedro II, the intellectual and widely respected Emperor of Brazil. Upon listening through the receiver, the emperor's astonished reaction, "My God, it talks!" became the international headline that guaranteed Bell's publicity. The second endorsement came from scientific authority, Lord Kelvin William Thomson, one of the most respected physicists of the era. Kelvin, recognizing the profound theoretical and technical complexity of the undulatory current, called the telephone the most wonderful thing I have seen in America. This combined royal and scientific stamp of approval provided the ultimate psychological impetus for investors, transforming a technical achievement into a viable business proposition. The public validation at the Centennial Exhibition was the catalyst that secured the necessary capital to move the technology out of the lab and into the nascent infrastructure age. 6. Empire and entrenchment. The birth of Ma Bell. The commercial development of the telephone began in 1877. Bell and his financial backers understood immediately that controlling the infrastructure was as important as possessing the patent. The initial years, 1878 to 1880, saw a brief but intense competition as the established titan, Western Union, deployed instruments designed by Thomas Edison and Elisha Gray. Bell's response was immediate and aggressive: litigation. The Bell Company sued Western Union for patent infringement. In 1879, Bell secured a landmark out-of-court settlement that cemented its control over the nascent industry. Under the agreement, Western Union withdrew entirely from the telephone business for 17 years, sold all its operational exchanges to Bell, and transferred all competing telephone-related patents, including those from Edison and Gray, to Bell. In exchange, Bell agreed to remain out of the competitive telegraph market. This strategic victory was crucial. It ensured Bell's near-total monopoly on the technology until 1894, when the original patent expired. The company quickly consolidated, forming the American Bell Telephone Company in 1880, which later led to the establishment of the American Telegraph and Telephone Company, AT&T, in 1885. The Bell organization relentlessly enforced its patent monopoly through legal battles, often suppressing alternative technologies and restricting access, which resulted in huge pockets of demand unmet. Despite these conflicts over high rates and restricted service, adoption was swift. Just 3 years after the first line was constructed, nearly 49,000 telephones were in use by 1881. Under leaders like Theodore Vail, the company adopted a corporate philosophy defined by one system, one policy, universal service. While conceptually appealing, a nationwide network that could connect everyone, this policy translated practically into a tightly controlled vertical monopoly. The immense capital and coordination required to build this sprawling network across vast distances arguably lent itself to such a centralized structure, justifying decades of dominance where local residential services were often subsidized by high-profit long-distance revenues. The strategic destruction of competition through litigation defined the structure of American telecommunications for the next century. 7. The long shadow. From Ma Bell to digital competition, the sheer scale and unassailable power of the Bell system, AT&T, eventually guaranteed its confrontation with antitrust regulators. The structure created by Bell's early legal victories, while perhaps necessary to build a unified national network, became unsustainable in the face of demands for market competition. The seeds of the ultimate breakup were sown throughout the 20th century, culminating in a major antitrust lawsuit filed by the U.S. Department of Justice in 1974, alleging widespread illegal practices designed to stifle competition. Even during this period, leaders like AT&T CEO John D. DeButz fought fiercely against regulatory change, delivering impassioned speeches rejecting competition and defending Vail's vision of one system, one policy as a crucial principle of public service. The long legal battle was settled on January 8, 1982, leading to the massive divestiture of the Bell system in 1984. This monumental decision shattered the centralized control of Ma Bell and resulted in the creation of several independent local operating companies, while AT&T retained its long-distance and manufacturing arms. The immediate effect was a surge in competition, particularly in the long-distance market, where companies like Sprint and MCI quickly emerged. However, the breakup also had complex, lasting consequences. Local residential service rates, which had long been artificially low due to subsidies derived from AT&T's highly profitable long-distance services, began to rise faster than the rate of inflation. Furthermore, the divestiture profoundly impacted how national broadcast television and radio networks distributed programming, demonstrating how deeply the Bell infrastructure had permeated American media distribution. The history of the Bell system, from its founding in patent litigation, 1879, to its radical fragmentation, 1984, established a permanent template for regulating large-scale communication utilities in the United States. This cycle of innovation, monopolistic integration, and eventual government-mandated divestiture provides the crucial historical precedent for today's policy debates surrounding digital giants and network neutrality. The fight over whether communication infrastructure should be treated as a single centralized public utility or an open competitive market is the true, enduring legacy of the Bell monopoly. 8. Bell's complex legacy. Beyond the receiver. Alexander Graham. Bell's life, much like his invention, was complex, expansive, and occasionally contradictory. While the telephone is undeniably his greatest contribution, his interests range widely, covering speech and deafness, flight, air conditioning, and even sheep breeding. Later in life, he became heavily involved in the controversial field of eugenics, demonstrating a nuanced and sometimes dark application of his scientific belief in societal progress. Bell spent his later years in Bainborough, Nova Scotia, where he was buried following his death in 1922. To commemorate the passing of the man who had irrevocably altered human connectivity, all telephone communication across North America ceased for 1 minute. This minute of enforced silence was a staggering demonstration of the telephone's total integration into the fabric of society, a physical acknowledgement that the invention had become essential infrastructure, binding the continent together. The invention of the telephone achieved what the telegraph could not. It translated emotion, nuance, and instantaneous recognition across vast distances. It fundamentally accelerated the pace of life, breaking down the tyranny of geography for personal connection. Bell's telephone was the essential forerunner to every subsequent leap in mass communication, from radio and television to the modern Internet, which simply integrates all these previous media into one pervasive information medium. The lasting narrative is not just the genius of the undulatory current, but the powerful combination of a unique theoretical background, a flawless legal strategy, and the ability to capitalize on public validation that successfully installed the empire of the human voice across the globe. The simple command, "Mr. Watson, come here," initiated more than just a conversation. It marked the beginning of a century of corporate warfare and laid the true foundations of the modern world. Starting with that first whisper about the undulating current, we've paved the way for every step that follows, from fiber optics to the smartphone in your pocket. Ultimately, the story of the phone is a compelling reminder that control over communication remains the most valuable commodity in human history. Stay with us, our viewer. There is even more interesting ahead. But for now, please like, subscribe, and write an opinion about this story of the appearance of the phone.